Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our book talk on digital Dharma, Recovering Wisdom. I'm Susan Meinheit, Tibetan and Mongolian specialist in the library's Asian division. The Asian division is the custodial division for all Asian language materials, with over 4 million items in over 200 languages, including, of course, about 18,000 Tibetan books. All of these are available to researchers in the Asian Reading Room just across the Great Hall from here. Digital Dharma documents the life work of the library's own E. Jann Smith to rescue and preserve Tibetan literary heritage. Jann founded the library's New Delhi. Jann joined the library's New Delhi office in 1965, at a time when Tibetans were bringing their precious texts into exile, and to begin an innovative program to get them published, cataloged, and distributed to libraries across the US, including Library of Congress. He eventually became New Delhi Field Director, and during his tenure, he was responsible for acquiring and cataloging over 8,000 volumes of Tibetan classical texts. He went on to become director of both the Jakarta and Cairo offices before his retirement in 1997. But the program for acquiring and cataloging Tibetan texts in our New Delhi office continues today. Jann's knowledge of Tibetan literature was truly encyclopedic, and he generously shared his knowledge and his home with an endless parade of scholars, lamas, and writers. He was also my mentor and dear friend from the time I joined the library, constantly inspiring my work with the collection. The books that were added to the Library of Congress and to university libraries became the foundation for Tibetan studies in the US because researchers finally had access to this vast, largely unknown corpus of texts. But Jann was also a visionary. He knew that even the most secure libraries face many challenges, and books are always vulnerable. So, when he retired, he began efforts to acquire them in digital format and to make them available not only to large institutions, but to the very lineage holders and individuals responsible for keeping the living traditions alive. And so he founded the Tibetan Buddhist Resource Center, later renamed as Buddhist Digital Resource Center, BDRC. This is the story that Digital Dharma tells, and we are delighted to have its co-authors, Daphne Yaking and Arthur Fishman, with us here today, as well as our speaker, Jann Ronis, and staff from BDRC. Jann is a scholar of Tibetan Buddhism and digital humanities. He received MA and PhD degrees from the University of Virginia, where he researched the history of the Tibetan kingdom of Dege in the 17th and 18th centuries. He is fluent in both classical and spoken Tibetan, and began his study of Buddhism in 1995 with the Antioch Buddhist Studies Abroad program in Bodh Gaya, India, followed by his study of Tibetan during a University of Wisconsin college year in Nepal program. After completing his MA degree, he spent the summer of 2001 in Lhasa with a team from the University of Virginia Tibetan and Himalayan Digital Library. In 2005, fresh from 18 months in Beijing and Kham on a Fulbright doctoral grant, Jann joined BDRC as a scholar in residence. He worked closely with Jann Smith to develop the first detailed content outlines, which remain the primary template for BDRC's metadata. He is now BDRC's executive director. Following the talk, we will have a short question and answer period. And for those attending remotely, you may submit questions in the Q&A. Please note that this session is being recorded, and any of your comments or questions will be included as part of the record. So now let's warmly welcome Jann Ronis.
Thank you all for coming, and a hearty thanks to everyone at the Library of Congress that made this talk possible. Special thanks to Susan Meinheit, above all, who was a protege of Jann Smith and has done so much to keep Tibetan studies strong, both in Washington and New Delhi, and to BDRC's communications officer, Tenzin Dickey, for helping arrange this talk. I'll begin with just a brief introduction to Jean's life and then move on from there. But Ellis Gene Smith, lived from 1936 to 2010. He was born in Logan, Utah, spent his youth in several states in the United States, studied Asian Studies at the University of Washington at Seattle as an undergraduate and graduate student, moved to India in 1965, began working for the LOC in 1968, first as a local employee, consulting on Tibetan texts, and was a full-time employee of the LC, I guess you call it, LC, from 1970 to 1997. He passed away, sadly, in New York City on December 16th, 2010. Gene was a legend in his own time, and since his passing, his accomplishments and gifts to humanity have only grown in significance. Today, we are here to talk about just one of the many things Gene is known for, though it happens to be the one that he devoted the most time to and the thing for which I believe that Gene was the most proud: the preservation and dissemination of Tibetan Buddhist texts. Soon after I started at BDRC in 2018, a special book surfaced. Gene's LC retirement book was shared with me by a longtime board member who had kept it safe in his personal library for many years. It really was a revelation. This book, and those of you who are long lifers at the LC have probably seen many of these. It's a collection of personal letters and testaments by one's colleagues over the decades that are then gathered together in a book form and bound. So Gene's LC retirement book, as you can imagine, just radiates warmth, appreciation, and just awesome accomplishment. Because we were here at the LC today, I thought I would share some excerpts with you. But first, a couple of images for those of you not so familiar with Gene. This is him as a youth. This picture is meant to sort of capture his student days. And then, of course, this is his dignified LC period photo with his beloved Dalmatians and his staff, including Mongram, who we'll hear more about later. But at any rate, the text is so small, but there's just a couple of them. So this is from James Billingen, and it reads, "You have been such a special ambassador to and from the library, and such a true builder of both this library and the deepest and most long-range interests of America. Major parts of our unparalleled foreign language collections are, in the professional sense, yours." That's the first letter in the book. I like this one too. "At last, you're carrying out your threat to leave the Library of Congress and work for someone else!" Exclamation point. "One of the best things that I ever did for the library was to perform the prime role in getting you on the staff." This one from Bill Schenk, who some of you may know. I had not been long at LC when I heard Gene Smith's name. Our collections today are better and more complete because of Gene. Donors get a bookplate for contributed books. Gene's name should really go into many books in our collection, as he is the donor. When patrons come to the library in 50 years, they can thank Gene for helping to build the collections they use. And then just two more. This is from the staff in Jakarta, where he worked for 9 years, as I'll mention. Let's just go maybe to the bottom segment. "Pak Gene, for me and other librarians in Indonesia, your name is identical with Library of Congress. At any time I mention or try to introduce LC, they will always say, oh, Pak Gene Smith?" I like this one. Gene's last deployment with the LC was as field director of the office in Cairo. "The Library of Congress has become a mecca for scholars from around the world. How appropriate then that a scholar should direct the LOC's efforts in Cairo. Gene Smith was such a director. From Asia, he brought deep knowledge of cultures and history. His apartment overflowed with books and papers. Even his casual conversations carried hints of vast erudition. Gene had a scholar's love of books, and all that he did in Cairo sprang from that source." So this is so genuine and true and accurate, and I have to kind of read between the lines and say that Maybe not all the field directors were great scholars, but that's not for me to hypothesize about. All right. And then, of course, the contribution from our Susan Meinheit here with a statement in Tibetan, and then a picture of Susan and Jean together on the rooftop of the Potala Palace. And in between them is a great scholar of Tibetan from Lhasa, who is the father of my right-hand person at BDRC, Dechen Pema, here in the room with me today. So it's a great reunion in so many ways, this talk. So I began by talking about the retirement book. Now let's move on to the main topic of the day, the newer book about Jean and his life. The retirement book covers Jean's 30-year career at the LOC. There is now a new book to record a later phase of Jean's life, Digital Dharma, Recovering Wisdom. The two authors of the book are Daphne Yakin and Arthur Fishman. Daphne is the filmmaker of Digital Dharma, One Man's Mission to Save a Culture, an Oscar-qualified documentary that was released in 2012. The book is a richly illustrated record of Daphne's journey with Jean to India and Nepal in 2008 and 2009 to engage with his closest partners in the collaborative efforts between Jean and many lamas to safeguard, reproduce, and distribute widely Tibetan texts. Daphne and Art received top billing for the book, of course, as you see there, but it was a team effort involving crucial input and support from Patricia Gruber and Tenzin Dickey, and a little assistance from myself. The five of us are also supremely grateful to Wisdom Publications for publishing this book. Former Wisdom CEO Tim McNeil was a co-founder of Jean's organization, and current publisher and CEO Daniel Aiken is a pillar of the current board of directors of BDRC. We will see many pictures from the book today. For now, however, I want to give some background and perspective so that when you view the book, you will get even more out of it. I will also discuss the continuation of Jean's work since his passing. Jean arrived in Seattle in 1956 to study Mongolian, Sanskrit, and Tibetan. Though Jean was a polymath and mastered many subjects, Tibetan studies became his primary field of study. Why was that? Well, Jean's time at University of Washington coincided with the arrival of one branch of the Sakya aristocratic and religious dynasty in Seattle in 1960. China's complete takeover in Tibet in 1959 sent tens of thousands of Tibetans into exile in India. At the time, the US intelligence agencies thought that the Chinese control of Tibet would be short-lived and that soon the Tibetans would return. Wishing to increase their knowledge about Tibet and its influence in Tibetan society, various Western agencies brought prominent Tibetan families to countries in North America and Europe to cultivate them, and also to offer crucial humanitarian assistance. The Sakya family, who came to Seattle, led one of the four major schools of Tibetan Buddhism and had many accomplished lamas in their ranks. The foremost of them, in the States at least, was Deshung Rinpoche, a truly remarkable scholar and meditator. He is the subject of an 800-page book by David Jackson, so if you wish to learn more about Deshung Rinpoche, please consult that book. It's really as detailed as you would need it to be. The salient point here is that Jean had the very good fortune to study literally at the feet of one of the greatest lamas of the 20th century, day in and day out, while living in relative comfort in Seattle. Deshung had a virtually infinite amount of knowledge about Tibetan religion, history, and book culture to share, and Jean received, absorbed, retained, and assimilated more than just about any other American would have been capable of. Jean then traveled to India in 1965 to carry out PhD research. Rather than write a book or do a dissertation or a series of articles, Jean did something far more enlightening and important. He helped reprint and distribute thousands of volumes of Tibetan books. Soon after jettisoning his promising PhD career and devoting himself entirely to the cause of Tibetans, Tibetan Buddhism, and the Dharma more generally. key to Jean's success in reprinting and thereby saving from oblivion the vast literary heritage of Tibet was his skillful use of a State Department loan repayment program known as the PL 480, or Public Law 480, which was a debt repayment program for food aid to India in the 50s. If we are going to plot the history of his great works and legacy into distinct periods, then this can be designated as PL 480 1.0. This period when Jean used analog means to reproduce Tibetan books in collaboration with Tibetan lamas and under their guidance and direction. Here's a picture of Jean with his second major mentor. Previously I mentioned Daishun Rinpoche. His second great mentor was Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche, the lama sitting there in the middle. The PL 480 books were published more or less in a kind of a Western book form. They were bound, they had covers, they opened this way, they had title pages in mixed romanization in English so that librarians in the States could make sense of them, but they were much longer than our normal books. And when you opened them up, they had 3, sometimes 4 or 5 Tibetan pages on each piece of paper. And so there's two men, longtime associates of Jean, standing in front of a bookcase full of PL 480 volumes. The man on the left is Mangaram, Jean's longtime associate and attendant. The PL 480 program, let alone BDRC, would never have reached its potential without Mangaram's dedicated, full-time service to Jean and the cause more broadly. So again, now we're talking about the PL 480 1.0 period of Jean's life. That's why the talk is called The Mini Lives of the PL 480 program. So here's another letter from Jean's retirement book. It's not from a fellow LC colleague, but from a very prominent scholar of Tibetan Buddhism, Don Lopez, who is also on the board of BDRC these days. It says, "I've continued to be struck by the magnitude of your contribution to the field. Every time I draw a Tibetan text from the shelf at the University of Michigan, I try to remind myself that I'm doing so as a direct result of your good work." This is really an incredible snapshot because this letter was written just 2 years before the founding of BDRC, before the existence of any scanned Tibetan books, back when you had to go to the library and read physical books, Tibetan books. Jean really changed everything, but gives you a sense for how significant this project was for Tibetan studies. But of course, primarily it was meant to help benefit the cultural sustainability of the Tibetans, and it certainly did. Now let's move on to PL 480 2.0 in the interest of time, although I think we're doing pretty good. Happy about that. And that is the age of TBRC, the Tibetan Buddhist Resource Center. So Jean retired in 1997 and founded the Tibetan Buddhist Resource Center, TBRC, in September of 1999. Here's a picture of Jean that most of you will not have seen, taken in 1997, maybe 1998. I think this was Central Park. And to his left is Andrea Soros, who was a crucial early supporter of Jean, who may have even lured him away from the LC for an early retirement, thanks to her. So we were founded in Cambridge or Somerville in 1999, and whereas in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Jean used photomechanical reproduction to make reprints of the Tibetan Buddhist pechas or texts. Starting in the late 90s, Jean, who had only been back in the States for a couple of years, quickly mastered all of the relevant technologies, databases, prosumer-grade scanning, and so forth, to figure out how he could embark on an equally bold and effective campaign to save and disseminate Tibetan literature. So here's an example of the ways that our scans were made. Since I have time, I'd like to mention our generous donors just in passing. the Kensei Foundation, the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation, Shelley and Donald Rubin Foundation, that top line, so important in the early days. Then the Robert H. and Ho Family Foundation, more recently, and then Andrea Soros's Trace Foundation, who was really crucial beginning and middle phases, and even now. So PL 480 2.0, what makes it 2.0? It's because of the digital reproduction and access. Digital scans and electronic means of copying and sharing. So in 1987, Jann departed from Delhi, where he had been the field director for a long time, and was transferred to Jakarta in '85, where he stayed for 9 years. Jann left the LOC in 1997 while field director in Cairo. In 1997, Jann finally moved back to the States, settling in New York at the invitation of Andrea and her newly founded Trace Foundation. Jann then moved to Somerville, Massachusetts, and worked for Wisdom Publications as an acquisitions editor, and also oversaw their newly launched academic series, Studies in Indian and Tibetan Buddhism. His destiny and calling, however, was to use his time away from the LC to return to his earlier mission of bold and beneficial work for the Dharma, Tibetan cultural sustainability, and scholarship. The Rubin family, Shelley and Donald, brought him to New York in 2002, which supercharged TBRC. From that time on, TBRC worked hard along two parallel tracks, scanning thousands of volumes of books and also creating a database of all of Jann's knowledge and the relevant bibliographic information that would help people make sense of the books. Again, Mongram played a crucial role in carrying out Jann's vision as he was the manager of the scanning operation in Delhi. The database was designed from scratch with a custom bibliographic model representing Jann's expert understanding of Tibetan book culture. And so while he was able to do so much crucial work through the LOC, I know that he always sort of chafed against their bibliographic conventions. And once he was his own man, started a whole new system for cataloging Tibetan books. The database also included data sets for persons, places, and topics, all of which were integrated with the records for the books. Chris Tomlinson, our late, dearly departed Chris Tomlinson, and Jeff Wallman were key to the realization of the database. Over time, Jann hired several Tibetan subject area experts to carry out the seemingly limitless cataloging tasks. And our book, Digital Dharma, has an insert dedicated to BDRC's senior librarians. So you can find that when you check out the book. Industrial scale scanning in India soon resulted in a massive and well-curated library of scans. Within a few years, TBRC had digitized and cataloged multiple editions of the Buddhist canon, the major writings of all the schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and all the classics from other fields of Tibetan culture, such as medicine and poetry. While the key objective was to digitize Jann's personal library of 11,000 volumes, when people heard about the TBRC project, they started to give Jann scans and photocopies of texts, including very rare works housed in collections from Dharamsala to Lhasa to Beijing. So he really magnetized other people who were doing similar work, but on a smaller scale. And so those contributions also enriched the resource, which was then circulated widely through the Tibetan community and the community of scholars more broadly. So the model of his digital work during PL 480 2.0 was, the original PL 480 program, so making multiple copies and distributing them widely to monasteries to help with the preservation and revival of Buddhism. Back in the mid-2000s, the BDRC website did not and could not offer viewing and downloading of its texts online. The tech budget just couldn't support that, and also the bandwidth in the US and in Asia wasn't up to that task anyways. So how were the scans shared? On those old-fashioned CDs, DVDs, CDs, and hard drives, which were offered to the viewing public for a nominal donation. And then starting around 2005, Jann Smith started to make annual trips back to India and Nepal to hand deliver these large hard drives, large and fragile hard drives containing the entire TBRC archive, comprising thousands of volumes. This is the subject of the book, Digital Dharma. The photographic content of the book and its narrative was created by Daphne and her crew while traveling with Jann to hand out the discs in, again, 2008, 2009, 2010. In fact, Daphne loves to tell the somewhat apocryphal story that Jann only assented to letting her crew follow him to Asia to follow his good deeds once he realized that he could use them as mules to carry even more hard drives across the borders and into the villages and to the monasteries. It's a true story. Let's look at a few pages of the book. It's extremely informative in terms of its text, but also really pleasurable to view and really inspiring to see because of the professional artistic photography of Tibetan monasteries, daily life, and culture. So a chapter that's dear to my heart is the one set in Kathmandu. Susan mentioned that I did the University of Wisconsin college year in Nepal, in Kathmandu, back in 97, 98. And so you see lovely photos like this one of Shechen Monastery. And again, it's a big coffee table book. So these high resolution, colorful, rich photographs are full size. Here's a monk carrying very skillfully a tray with tormas on them into the temple. Prayer wheels. A Newari Buddhist man around the Bodhanath temple. And there's Jann walking through the gate of Shechen Monastery with old friends. So some of you may recognize the monk standing next to Jann. That was him back in maybe 1977, 78. I can't remember when that photo was taken. Mathieu Ricard. Time magazine called him the world's happiest man once, based on some neurological research they did onto him and his meditation prowess. And just one more thing about this photo. As you see here, BDRC is not the only organization carrying out digitization. Far from it, and we never intended to be. Here at Shechen Monastery, they have a very robust text collection, conservation, reproduction, and digitization program. Here's a monk at a computer typing in texts, which Jann, is obviously very excited to see. And here's a really special picture. So again, on these tours, Jann wanted to hand deliver hard drives containing thousands of volumes of Tibetan texts as a entirely second phase of his epic work that he started with these very same lamas in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So here Jann is sitting, the left side of the picture, very humbly listening to a sermon by Chokinima Rinpoche. And what is the sermon about? It's about the great benefits and the virtue of the TBRC project. So then, as captured in both the film and in the book, then Jann went and presented the Lama with one of these massive hard drives, which the Lama then touches to his head, just as he would a physical scripture. And then embraces Jann afterwards to thank him for what he's done. This is the most iconic photo in the whole book. It just couldn't be any better. The big Buddha statue in the background. It's so colorful, and then the emotion conveyed by their embrace. Jann passed away in December of 2010, immediately after another one of these long and grueling trips to Asia to deliver hard drives. He arrived on the evening of December 15th and passed away sometime before the morning of December 16th. He wasn't feeling well on that trip, but didn't delay his departure because there was an in-person board meeting scheduled for December the 16th. The board members were already in New York, waiting to meet Gene that morning in his office to spend the whole day talking about, the strategy and the vision and the plan and the budget of BDRC. But he didn't come to the meeting. Someone went to his home to, check in on him, and sadly he was found, in his bed. But the board members, Tim McNeil, who I mentioned before, has done a couple of events with us, and he tells the story of that day, which he'll never forget. And he says that he sees Gene's passing as something that was sort of managed by him. Tim McNeil feels that it was quite skillful, to use a Buddhist term, of Gene to pass away while the board was together, so that they could immediately launch into planning for Gene's succession. And so it was devastating, but because Gene was so beloved, his obituary appeared in numerous newspapers and magazines around the world, from the New York Times to The Economist to newspapers in India as well. One of BDRC's senior librarians just this month published a new Tibetan language cradle-to-grave biography of Gene. And we have a copy for you, Susan. So for those of you that can read Tibetan, here it is. In English, the title is Gene Smith's biography, The White Lotus. And, I wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for BDRC's staff, which valiantly carried on after Gene's passing, undergoing a lot of shock and hardship and challenges, but kept the organization strong. In 2015, Gene's organization, TBRC, went through a strategic rethink and emerged with a new name, the Buddhist Digital Resource Center, to reflect an expanded mission. And so if I can just spend 30 seconds on this, deviating a little from the Tibetan topic, by expanded mission, BDRC, what's now known as BDRC, decided that there were other Buddhist literary cultures that stood to benefit from the TBRC treatment, meaning intensive digitization, cataloging, and free, open distribution online and by other means. And so TBRC decided that there were communities in Southeast Asia that would be good partners for us. And so we, soon after changing our name, we launched into a project at the Fragile Palm Leaves Foundation in Bangkok. It's probably the largest personal library of palm leaf manuscripts in the world. They have over 20,000 individual bundles. And the largest single segment of that collection is made up of fragile palm leaves in the Burmese script, some of which are in the Pali language, some of which are in vernacular Burmese, and a lot of them are bitext. So they are in mixed Burmese and Pali. We're digitizing all 11,000 bundles. We're about 2/3 of the way through that project, funded entirely by the Kensei Foundation. We're so grateful for them. And I guess I should mention that the Fragile Palm Leaves collection was collected and curated by the legendary scholar Peter Skilling, who in so many ways is like the Gene Smith of Southeast Asia. It's really an honor to be working with him. So these are different types of books. They're written on palm leaves and not paper. So the process is a little more time consuming, as each palm leaf, which is inscribed and then inked, needs to be cleaned and then oiled before it is filmed. So we have two crews working side by side there in Bangkok. The cleaners and inkers, and then the digitizers. And then during the pandemic, we worked in Cambodia on the Khmer Manuscript Digitization Project, and in just about 2.5 years, we were able to digitize over 1.3 million pages of Khmer, Khmer palm leaf manuscripts, over 700,000 hard copy palm leaf manuscripts that we borrowed from temples in country, and then around 400,000 or more films or pages that were photographed by the French. But the film was degrading and needed an intervention. And so all combined, it's over 1 million pages online for free and open access. We thank the Khmer Buddhist Foundation in the Bay Area for supporting that project. This is from our workshop in Phnom Penh. And then lastly, the National Library of Mongolia. Jann would have been really proud of this project. We're working at the National Library of Mongolia in collaboration with ALL, Asian Legacy Library, to digitize their Tibetan language collection. They have over 30,000 volumes of Tibetan language texts representing Tibetan and Mongolian Buddhism. The collection is vast, a lot of unknown texts, many pristine versions of woodblock prints from Beijing and Eastern Tibet that aren't widely available elsewhere. We're discovering many new things along the way, and it's just typical of our project. All of the staff members are local, college educated in Tibetan and Buddhist studies, and they really appreciate the opportunity to work in the cultural field. So this project has been a real pleasure for us. The texts, when we first started the program, were, as you see them there on the left panel, pretty much in the same condition they were in when they were brought by the Russians to Ulaanbaatar and just thrown into the warehouse. But now they've been opened up, cleaned, cataloged, preserved. The data largely is already on our servers in the cloud, so God forbid if there was a fire or flood there tomorrow. 6,000, 7,000 have already been preserved, and we hope that we'll be able to continue the project. All right. So I've spoken about our inspiring and ongoing text digitization projects. They benefit Buddhists and scholars worldwide and would certainly make Jann proud. Now I would like to touch briefly upon the third period or phase in our long history. And this third act is our present age, which most of us are still adjusting to, the age of AI, artificial intelligence, for lack of a better word. BDRC has fully embraced AI, so to speak, as a means of unlocking the archive of scans so that the embedded text can be activated, turned into usable e-texts, and then processed for the purpose of information extraction and data mining. So how does this happen? Well, through partnerships with Google and enterprising graduate students from Hamburg and Harvard, we are utilizing pre-existing OCR models and improving them. OCR, optical character recognition. So that's the technology by which you can take a two-dimensional flat image that has text in it, and the computer will be able to distinguish the text from the background and then extract the text in a usable form that can be copy-pasted and put into a Word document, simply said. OCR, optical character recognition. All right. So we're working with Google and graduate students to take advantage of pre-existing OCR models for Tibetan and then improving them greatly. So we are also working with others to create language models that can clean up the typos and errors that still crop up in OCRs of Tibetan texts. We are also creating narrow OCR engines that can work on particular formats, such as manuscripts and xylographs, even the hands of individual scribes. Our website has an innovative e-text search engine and viewer. So after we run OCR on our texts, we don't just keep it for our own, private data mining. No, we put it online for you to search on and read. Our innovative e-text viewer allows for en face viewing, where you can see both the original image and the e-text side by side. We already have 1 million pages of new e-text that originated first as OCR, but then through these partnerships were cleaned up using a hybrid model of automated and also human cleanup They're online. And so this alone is a major game changer. 1 million pages so far. There's tens of millions of pages to go, but we have to go in fits and starts. But this is definitely the path forward for us. Tibetans want it, scholars want it, it's exciting, and so we're happy to really be already deep into PL 480 3.0. So here you see our innovative eText viewer. Now, we're adding value to the eText corpus by partnering with the leading Tibetan IT and lexicography organization known as Munlam IT, Munlam Information Tech. The Tibetans here will know of him. He's done so much for Tibetan IT over the last decade, starting with a whole portfolio of very creative Unicode Tibetan fonts. But I think these days he should be best known for his dictionary. So the Munlam Tibetan Dictionary, when you print it out, takes up 223 volumes, and I've seen about 100 of these volumes, it's true. There are 367,000 individual entries in the dictionary. It's encyclopedic. It covers all of the verbs, all of the nouns, but lots of specialized terminology as well as entries for important people and persons. It was created by a team of 200 scholars, and without bragging, BDRC did play a small role in their team being able to access quickly and efficiently all of the text needed in order to generate a dictionary, an encyclopedia of this magnitude. And so through a special partnership with Munlam, he is allowing us to integrate the full text of his dictionary, a Tibetan to Tibetan dictionary, into our eText corpus. And so now, as you see here, you'll search for a term or a word, open up the eText, and then if you encounter a word that you want to know more about, you just highlight it, and then you have the option to engage the Munlam dictionary, and it will open up on the right panel, and then you just click on the word you want, and it gives you his expert definition. What you see here is a short definition. It's still, the full explanation of this term, but many of the entries are like Wikipedia entries. They're essays. They go on. And in fact, because of the differing views on certain religious terminology or different interpretive traditions about medical topics, the dictionary entries may have several different definitions for one term, each contributed by a group that holds a different point of view on an individual word. So it itself is a great record of the full range of Tibetan interpretive culture about their texts and civilization. So PL 480 3.0. Where are we going from here? Well, machine translation of Tibetan. Why stop with just eTexts? Machine translation of Tibetan. BDRC is contributing to a major effort that's now based at UC Berkeley. I've seen it in action just last month in February. It's already quite good, but there's still some room for improvement. BDRC doesn't have the technologists that can do this, but what can we offer? The corpus. As you know, AI requires scale. There has to be a certain size to a corpus in order for it to get accurate. Well, who's got 30 million pages scanned? Who's the one with the pipeline to Google? It's BDRC. So we're working on the eText because it benefits our database, but we also share it openly with the broader Tibetan IT community because they're working on technologies that benefit all of us. So I guess another aspect of PL 480 3.0, I hadn't thought of it, is it's so collaborative. So in fact, just last week, I requested the Berkeley group to create machine translations from Tibetan into English of every title in our entire database. I think we'll expect to have that in 2 or 3 months. So that'll make finding text that much easier. We're going to do advanced processing of eText, deeper integration of Tibetan and the Chinese canon, and hopefully OCR for Southeast Asian texts. I had a call just this week about that. And so PL 480 3.0, there's just two more twists to that theme that I want to make. One is that today we have with us Gene Smith's grandnephew, Gary Crofts, who just happened to be in DC this week, and so he's here. It's really a full circle return to the source. Here we are at the Library of Congress, and with TBRC and Gene's nephew, and it's just really the whole family is here again. So I wanted to point that out. Sorry to put you on the spot, Gary. That's why I didn't mention you earlier. I knew you were here and deserved recognition, but I wanted to save it for that. And then PL 480 3.0 plus plus plus. I want to end with this. There might be the opportunity for a new federal grant for text preservation in India. In December, the USAID put out an RFI, request for information, called Preservation of Tibetan Manuscripts and Cultural Resources to create a sustainable model of digital library. Certainly we responded to that and are hoping that we can play some role in this proposed program. So those of you in the audience who are in a decision-making position regarding this, I'm just saying, yes. So in closing, our 25th anniversary is also coming up, just to add more numbers to the themes of the day. 480, 3.0, 25th anniversary. So what are we feeling going forward? Renewed commitment to text preservation in Asia, improved localization in Asian languages and other forms of outreach, and supporting the continued relevancy of BDRC and Buddhist studies and Dharma ecosystems. We thank all of our supporters and contributors and collaborators for helping us get to where we are now and staying with us as we go forward. Please visit us at bdrc.io, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and read our blogs and more about us on the page. Thank you very much, Suzanne, and all of you here today. Sure.
So how's the OCR doing with cursive Tibetan text and all the abbreviations? How's the recognition work with all those texts?
Great question. So the question was about OCR for manuscripts, for handwritten texts. Just in brief, handwritten text recognition is a subset of OCR, and it requires its own form of training data. Right now, the current OCR models do an okay job with manuscripts, but it's not good enough for working at scale. But we do hope in the future to train some HTR models using Transcribus for one, but because xylographic fonts and computer fonts are so much more clear and consistent, we're starting with those two types of texts. But yes, when it gets to the abbreviations and so forth, if we want to just reproduce the abbreviations without expanding them, I think that should be relatively easy, but it shouldn't be difficult to normalize the abbreviations so that we can, at least on the back end, allow you to search either the abbreviation or the full form, and it'll be able to search on both of those. Do you work in OCR?
Well, not right now.
Okay.
Just digitization.
Great. But yeah, I mean, there's no major, rather technical barrier to handwritten text recognition. It just takes a little more time, but yeah, there's great HTR, handwritten text recognition for European manuscripts, for instance. And also, I think there are a lot of iPads that can read your handwriting. So it'll come to Tibetan in time. And I'm just speaking about what I know of. There are probably people in India or elsewhere in Tibetan communities that are working on it on their own. I believe so.
Hey, thank you for the lecture. I have two questions. One question, when I heard you talk about the crowdsourcing, the approach in this project. So may I ask, this approach is currently is a major approach, or in the future, because right now the cloud sourcing is very popular, right, for this digitization of huge project. So my question is this approach is the major approach for you for our project?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so you're asking about crowdsourcing. On a regular basis, partners share data with us because we have a platform that is well known, it works well, we have a staff, and so our database is enriched regularly with contributions from scholars who have good quality photographs of scans, and they share them, with their friends one-to-one, but they have no platform for making them more widely available. And they know that BDRC has a good reputation for being able to take other people's data, clean it up, format it, and share it online freely and openly. And we're also very good about giving full attribution to the people who share with us. I would say that for us, crowdsourcing means receiving data from others, scans, or sometimes databases that are not associated with scans, but a lot of structured data. And then, you saw that Geshe Munlam gave us rights to use his dictionary. That's been really helpful. What we don't have yet, if this is what you mean by crowdsourcing, is a kind of a Wikipedia approach where people can get an account and go in and edit the data. We don't have that capability. We don't have that planned right away, just full crowdsourcing. But we're always open to corrections and edits and contributions from our friends. But because of the massive scale of the archive, it would just be too much, and the large size of our user base, we don't have a team that could be dedicated just to quality control to look at sort of small-scale contributions from the crowd. But maybe someday we'll get there. Yeah, thank you for your question. Did you have a second question?
Okay. We have a question in the chat. It's, hello, thanks for your great presentation. I'm particularly interested in your collaboration with Mongolia. You mentioned that you were concentrating on Tibetan books solely. It is sad to hear because the Mongolian part is even bigger and not less unique. Do you have any plans to work on digitization of Mongolian books? I believe it fits the renewed vision of your mission as reflected in TBRC, BDRC shift. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I would say that in brief, BDRC is found a wonderful partner in the National Library of Mongolia. We've made great progress, especially during the pandemic, during this period when the facilities of the National Library of Mongolia are moving to new buildings across town. The administrator and our manager have been really heroic about keeping the workflow going in a very consistent manner. There are 30,000 volumes of Tibetan texts. We're maybe 20% of the way through. One limitation is funding. Another limitation is space. As you saw, these digitization stations take up a lot of room, and then there's also catalogers, and the library, at least prior to their move, only had so much free space available for us to use. So even the Tibetan project couldn't be sped up too much in the near term, even if we wanted to. But just to say that we would be very open to working with Mongolian language Buddhist texts, and we get invited by people and organizations to collaborate with them. And so if it's in the interest of the National Library of Mongolia and their Ministry of Culture, and we find supporters for such a project, sure, there's nothing about our mission or our charter to hold us back from having a positive impact on a Mongolian-led effort to preserve their Mongolian language Buddhist texts. That would be a great day for Mongolia, Mongolian Buddhism, and BDRC.
Concerning outreach, do you have any programs or planned engagements with the countless individual Buddhist monasteries there are to comprehensively incorporate their own ancient and extensive libraries?
Well, in a sense, yes, that work is already underway. So I invite you to go to our website, bdrc.io, and if you go and look through the news and blog posts, you'll see one from August or maybe early September of this year. It's a blog post that was written upon the return of our head librarian from his annual trip to India and Nepal. He goes every year on a family visit, but then spends a few more weeks traveling around, meeting with some of our partners at Buddhist and Tibetan monasteries and libraries and educational institutes in India and Nepal. They go and they share ideas, exchange recent news about texts that have been published or discovered. He offers training, gains a lot of new insights from them as well. And if there are ever questions or expressions of need about how a library can be cataloged or digitized, he offers assistance. And so that's an ongoing program. But just more generally, over the past 25 years, we've had close contact with, I would say, the majority of the important major collections at individual monasteries. And so most of those have already been digitized and integrated into the TBRC database. I mean, another way to approach this is to say that we would not have reached the milestones we have of 30 million pages of Tibetan text if we hadn't been working with Tibetan monasteries around Asia, including on the Tibetan Plateau all this time. So yes, we began digitizing Jean's personal collection of 11,000 volumes, but we've tripled that, quadrupled that since then by working with partner organizations who would like their text to be digitized. And in cases, or rather just to put a fine point on it, we always work on site, only when invited, with our partners, and we hope that we leave only photographs and maybe often equipment if we can afford it, and training and experience. And we take away only scans. But you can come to our office. We don't acquire books. We don't have our own collection. We barely even have functioning scanning machines at our office. And I say that just because, yes, our work is with the Buddhist communities on site as a collaborative effort, not just something we do by removing texts from their communities of use and taking them far, far away. That doesn't happen. How many BDRC users do we have here today? Great. Lobsangla.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jann. I have a question for you or anyone on your team. In the next 10 years, what are some of your goals and some of the items on your wish list for BDRC?
Great, thank you. So 10-year roadmap, moonshot. Well, we went to Google for the first time in 2018, and one of their persons involved in Asian studies and OCR asked us what our moonshot was. And we said to have a complete and accurate OCR corpus for the entire collection. And in 2018, that really was a moonshot. Like, yeah, if we work steadily, we'll have that in 5 years. Now, I guess it has been 5 years, but let's just think as if the pandemic was this very short period of time. It started slow, and it's really ramping up, and my goodness, we are, almost there. It's just now a matter of time. Machine translation of Tibetan. Who would have thought that that would be possible? The work on that really didn't get started until about a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, but again, just very preliminary steps, and then things have progressed very rapidly. So 10-year moonshots, I can say that those are major accomplishments that we hope to achieve sooner than that. But now, what are we going to do when we have that? Well, as we were talking about earlier today, OCR, automated translation, and so forth. What will that allow us to do? One, deeper, much deeper data mining, information extraction, engagement with the classical texts. But it will also allow for reformulations. So just to throw another trendy term out there, ChatGPT. There isn't a major technical barrier to there being a kind of a bot that would allow the classical texts to be reformulated in a modern idiom, to be interpreted in new ways, all for the purpose of creating a new brand of contemporary Tibetan literature that is a seamless sort of evolution out of the classical texts, and is something new for the modern age, for the readership to continue. And all of this is for the sustainability of the culture, and by culture here we're talking about readers in the present and future generations. They're going to want to learn modern topics and about contemporary ideas in their language, and AI can help contribute to the production of new literature. Not that human authors will ever be obsolete, certainly not. But just to say that those are some of the things we hope to do as we maybe, say, wind down the scanning of 100, 300, 500-year-old manuscripts.
Thank you so much for attending today. Thank you.